This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. Odds you might have graduated high school knowing all of the main themes of Huckleberry Finn, the basics of cellular biology, and with that, advanced placement calculus credit. Or, if you're like me, barely scraping through trigonometry. But you probably weren't taught how to balance a checkbook, pay your taxes, or take out a car loan. I certainly never learned those skills in school. But that is all changing, starting with the class of 2027. Starting next school year, Connecticut students will be required to take a financial literacy course. April is National Financial Literacy Month, and today we hear from those that advocated to get this coursework into schools. And joining us now is someone familiar to the Where We Live family. We have Nan Morrison, who is the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Council for Economic Education. Welcome back, Nan.
Thanks so much, Catherine. Delighted to be here.
And we are also welcoming State Representative Corey Parrish to the show. Very excited to have you on, Representative.
Thanks, Catherine. Excited to be here as well.
And for our listeners, let us know if you have any questions or if you want to join the conversation, 888-720-9677, or leave us a comment on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. So, Nan, I want to start with you. Can you give us some updates on financial literacy across the country? Are we seeing more states make financial literacy a required part of the curriculum now?
Yes, we have really good news that in the last 2 years, 12 more states have added financial education as a requirement to graduate. That brings us up to 35, more than 2/3 of the states.
And so this is not a new push. We've seen this before, but why do you think we're seeing this being a very sort of hot topic right now?
Yeah, there are a number of factors that are coming together. Well, it seems like it's in the rearview mirror. The pandemic really laid bare the fact that so many Americans were so unprepared for this across the board. The other thing that we realized was that requirements mean access. And if you're in a wealthier school district, the likelihood of you having any access to financial education, as your teacher in the next segment will talk about, it's about 16 points higher in a wealthier district than a not so wealthy district. So once there's a requirement, you have equitable access. We have more data now that said this matters. After college, kids with financial education get better financing packages, have gotten better financing packages for college. They have lower default rates. They have better credit scores. We've also become, I think, better at building coalitions of parents, teachers, students even, to bring this all together. And very few politicians are going to say that this is a bad idea. This is a really bipartisan issue. Then you back that up with even more data that says that better trained teachers make a difference. There's plenty of free, high quality teacher training, great resources out there for teachers. So I think there are a lot of things that are coming together to make a difference. And, once you get 35, there's a lot of momentum and you really want to get those last 15. So I'm hoping those last states will jump on board.
Well, you mentioned students playing a role here, and we're going to hear about how they have advocated to get this into the classroom as well. But what are you seeing and hearing from them?
It never fails. The first time you ask a question to a student about how is this class, they say, oh, it was the most important class that I took because it makes a difference. And the other things that we hear, my parents don't like to talk about this at home. Or, we made it, we had budgets, but we didn't really have a lot to invest. So now that I have a good job, I don't really know what to do with my 401k. So I'm really, really glad that I understood this. Or, oh, I didn't know that I was still in high school and I could open up a Roth IRA. So their eyes really get opened early and they feel way more prepared to make good decisions and less afraid to ask the key questions because they have the language and the vocabulary. So the students really love this. And I'll let Barbara speak more about that and our student who's here.
Well, I'm really glad you mentioned it as a language because I think it is a language in of itself. And I mean, I consider myself a slightly smart person, maybe a little bit, but then sometimes I'll read something that's related to finance. I'm like, I have absolutely no idea what I'm reading. And we've talked about this when it comes to things like taxes. And you just mentioned that too, Nan, that money is still rather a taboo topic for a lot of people. Are you hearing more from parents who are starting to teach financial literacy at home?
Yeah, I think what happens with parents is that once their children start speaking about it with them, it's the veils fall and it becomes a little more comfortable. We've also run a series of financial literacy nights for families, and that's a real eye opener. It's great for the schools because the teachers see how valuable it can be for their students. The parents start to see that it's not such a terrible topic to talk about. They thought their kids might be scared, but it's not. And I think the really important thing is for families where this just isn't a thing to do, whether it's cultural, language barrier, whatever it is, and that really cuts across socioeconomic lines, that we've given this to the student, right? They have an opportunity to learn these very important skills. And the financial world is only becoming more complicated. You talked about a language. There are so many more words today, so many different kinds of investment vehicles, payments vehicles that kids have access to. They really have to understand what's out there so that they can manage their risk.
And I think with one barrier, perhaps another option opens up. So, which I think today it looks like social media platforms. So, are you seeing that kids are learning more about personal finance on social media platforms like TikTok, for example? If certain kids realize that they're not getting that education at home or in the classroom, do they go to TikTok, for example?
I think kids go to TikTok for everything. Most of my friends now go to
Right.
TikTok for everything, and we are not kids. But I do, and it's just like anything else. If you picked up a book or a magazine, or were listening to someone on the radio, you have to be able to make those judgment calls. And I think nothing really substitutes for an actual educator in a classroom having that dialogue and teaching those critical thinking skills around this. That's why we run a National Personal Finance Challenge, because it helps the kids work together in teams, which is also great, but it really teaches them to take the knowledge and problem solve together and see how that plays out in the real world for them. And you're just not going to get that on TikTok. Although, like, in the absence of anything, there are definitely some really good people on there who are providing useful and thoughtful information. But there's nothing, to me, as the child of an educator, nothing really substitutes for having a great teacher and having some team activities and real hands-on learning to show what to do and really put it into use.
Well, and then talking about that hands-on learning, can you give our listeners an idea of what does financial literacy and personal finance curriculum look like?
So, well, the first thing that I think everybody should do is go to our website and look at the reasonably new national standards for personal financial education. We put that together with Jumpstart and a coalition of experts, all sorts of educators, parents, students. It's really great. And it tells what kids should be able to do at grade 4, 8, and 12. And that really, those standards, just like in any other subject like math or English or history, really set the curriculum. And then our website, econedlink.org, has different units that you can put against those standards. And great teachers who know what they're doing and are very well versed in this can just grab lessons and put something together. But the standards is really the place to start. And they cover a variety of key topics. They cover savings, investing, earning income, insurance, risk. So it really covers all of the basics that you need to know to be financially functional, I'll say.
And earlier on, we mentioned that starting with the class of 2027, all high school students are now required to take a financial literacy course to graduate. And getting this course mandated was a bipartisan effort, and Representative Corey Paris was a huge part of this push. So, Representative Paris, I want to bring you into the conversation. Can you give us an idea of how this all started? Because I understand this was actually a very personal issue for you as well.
It was extremely personal, and I didn't realize until recently the other layers to that being more personal than I had even considered. And so for me, I was an independent student at the age of 18, and I moved to Connecticut at 19 and did not have help from my parents to put myself through school. I had to make all of those decisions around financial aid, around student loans, getting my first credit card. And a lot of those decisions were made purely on survival. And there are a lot of students out there who are facing these very same decisions and having to make pretty stark choices around finances because of needing to survive. And coming to school here, it was a $300 credit card limit, and it was I going to eat something other than ramen one night, or was I going to actually buy a book for a class that I needed? And trying to figure out, if I didn't purchase that book, how could I get all of the pages and necessary reading curriculum out of that book in order to pass the class, but work full time. But it was just so much to take on. And I just kept telling myself, if I graduate, I'll be successful. I'll make the money back. But then you don't realize once you graduate all of the pitfalls that you fall into, because life, like young people say, life be lifing.
Life really be life. It doesn't matter what age you're in.
It
Life
does
be
not.
lifing. Yeah.
And you plan so much to really, I think, be victorious in this game called life, but it throws you through so many loops. And I think after college, it was apparent to me, my first job, I was so excited. I was getting paid $35,000 a year for my first job. And I thought, oh my God, it's so much money.
That's better than mine.
That's great.
Mine was about 27,000. I was like, I'm going to be able to afford everything.
Everything.
The joke was on both of us, though.
Both of us, because I got paid once a month and didn't realize the pay frequency. And I was traveling into New York City for work, and I had to, buy, a monthly pass to go into New York City, and then taxes. And it wasn't just taxes for the state of Connecticut. It was New York taxes and borough taxes and city taxes. It was all of these crazy things that I hadn't accounted for. And no one told me. But I was also too ashamed to ask, because I didn't want to look like I was uninformed or naive or too young. But I think that fear of what I might have been perceived as followed me into my mid to late 20s. And I didn't realize how much it was important for me to help build a foundation for other young people who we want to see be successful in this state moving forward, how important it was to build that foundation for them through policy. So it was a no-brainer. And most recently, I tell this story, I was visiting my grandmother at home, and she was getting something delivered to the house. So I wanted to, tip the delivery person. And I asked her, where's money? Does she have any cash in her? I didn't have any cash on myself, on me. And she said to me, yeah, go into the living room, look near the painting of Jesus. There's a family Bible in there. Turn to the Old Testament right before Psalms. You'll see a birthday card in there. There should be some money in there. And I'm thinking, what is she talking about? I did exactly what she told me. And lo and behold, there's a 5-10-year-old birthday card from a cousin with like $100 in there. And she says, take 70, don't take more, take 70 out. I may need cash or something else. Give the guy 10. And I'm thinking, why don't you have this money in the bank? And I realized she had money all over the house, in her car, in the most craziest little spots. And she said to me, I was a widow at 27 in the 70s. And for up to 5 years after your grandfather had died, I still had to have my bank account in his name. I could not have a bank account in my name until the early 1980s, or I couldn't buy a home with my name on it until at least 1974, 1975. And she said, so I've always just kept money set aside just in case, something perilous may take place or happen, or if I need quick access to it, because I've never known what that access and independence meant for me. And so this is now a new wave, not only in terms of bridging the gap in racial equity, but also gender equity, which I hadn't realized before either.
And I'm sure with the story about your grandma that you just shared, and also your own personal story, that is the story of many, not just young people, but adults as well, which we
Right.
will get into adult financial literacy in a little bit. But, there's a lot of students that testified to support this.
Yeah.
Were there any stories that jumped out to you, or some with their testimonies, like anything that you were like, oh man, yes.
There was a student from, I want to say, oh gosh, this is awful. We see so many students. I want to say the student was from the New Haven area, and testified to the fact that he watched his parents struggle for many, many years, not wanting to talk about, any financial hardships in front of him or his siblings, and didn't want to, really deny him or his siblings the opportunity to be involved in extracurriculars or going to, the prom or homecoming or whatever the case might be. And so they just never talked about it, but he could see the stress weighing on his family. And if I'm not mistaken, afterwards, I met with the student outside of the hearing room, and he told me that his dad had suffered from anxiety attacks. And most of it came from not being able to be open about their financial situation, because there was just too much shame, and they didn't want to, pass that shame on to their students. And so I think that was one of the ones that really stood out, because then it became that much more important for us to recognize that, rising tides lifts all boats. And so if we're educating and mandating this curriculum, it was only going to help every student, every parent, every resident of our state in some way or another, because we are also interconnected by our financial ties in Connecticut.
And so we will be talking about financial trauma later on as well. And Nan gave us an idea earlier of what this looks like in the classroom. Can you talk about whether or not you hope that this course will help break some of that taboo around money? What do you hope will be a part of this course?
I'm hoping that there will be economic empowerment that comes from this course. I hope that there will be a real understanding of even why certain cultures have hesitance around financial literacy and economic conversations and what that looks like. It stems a lot from the women's movement. It stems a lot from slavery. It stems from some of the immigration of many different classes and cultures and ethnicities into this country, and what that global economic power can mean for so many young people who are, on the precipice of being able to use, cryptocurrency, and they're able to invest in a matter of seconds through apps like Robinhood or whatever the case might be. They are so much more financial literate just because of the resources that are made available to them, in which we in our generation and the generations before us were not. I also think it's incredibly important for us to, set up our young people after their post-academic careers to be fully integrated into society any which way possible. And by that, I mean, we hold about $19.5 billion in student loan debt in the state alone. We have the fifth highest amount of student loan debt in the country across nearly 500,000 borrowers. And on average, it's about $50,000 that people owe, if not more. And so being able to talk about student loans, credit card debt, which is right behind student loans, medical debt, which will also increase health equity for many communities as well. These are all the important things that we show the intersectionality of these important issues in our life.
April is Financial Literacy Month, and today we're talking about a new required financial literacy course. And staying with us is Nan Morrison, who's the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Council for Economic Education, and State Representative Corey Paris. And coming up next, we hear from one financial literacy educator in our state. And for our listeners, did you take personal finance while you were in school? Or do you wish you did? Because I think we all wish we did. You can join the conversation, 888-720-9677, or leave us a comment on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. If you have a student at home that is set to graduate high school in 2027 or any time afterwards, they'll be required to take a financial literacy course to graduate. And joining us now is one of many teachers who testified at the state capitol to push for this change in schools. Barbara Angelicola-Manzolli is a business education teacher at Lewis S. Mills High School in Burlington. Thank you so much, Barbara, for being with us this morning.
Thank you for having me and for making sure that we get all this very important information out to everyone.
Absolutely. And with us also is Nan Morrison, who's the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Council for Economic Education, as well as State Representative Corey Paris. So, Barbara, I want to talk about, where does your passion for teaching this course come from? I think we want to talk about, the fun in the financial, right?
So I grew up in an Italian Sicilian family in Waterbury, and we did not have a ton, but I watched my parents and my grandparents make everything we had go far. I always joke that I thought we had macaroni 3 times a week because we were Sicilian and Italian, and found out later in life that it was because that was the way my mother could feed 4 children. I learned at a young age the value of a dollar. So coming up through college and high school with my friends, there were so many of them that didn't know anything about a checking account. And I'll never forget, my best friend in college, we're still great friends today. She opened up her checking account and came to me and said, I have no idea how to write a check. That triggered something in my 20s, and that just came forward. When I changed from business to education, I realized in business when I would hand people new paperwork about a 401k or doing their medical information, they had nothing. They didn't have anything coming from home. Translate it to when I get into high school and I'm watching students go in the military, go out into the job force, go into a 2-year school, a 4-year school, and yet they couldn't make a budget. So in 2007, Connecticut offered a grant for teachers that wanted to teach this, and we jumped all over it. And it took me from 2007, our first class where it was graduation requirement was 2023. How do I know it works? I hear from my former students. When they buy a car, when they buy a house, when they're getting their first job, they are reaching out and telling me that it made a difference and it made them think. I always tell my students, I only plant the seed. You have to take that seed and make it grow, right? Mm-hmm. And the first thing I say in class is, I want you to retire when you want to. And in order for you to do that, you have to start saving when you get that very first big person job for your retirement, or it's not going to happen.
Right. And
since then, my passion has grown because of people like Corey Parrish. When I met Corey last February at when he announced this bill, and all of the people that I've got to work with throughout this, it's amazing how much you realize this is something that we need now, because life has changed. And when life changes, we need to change what we're teaching our children.
And I'm always amazed when we're hearing from our young people, because clearly this is something that they want, and they made sure, the adults are hearing them. And Barbara, we know a few of your students had testified in support of getting this course mandated in the classroom. We're going to hear from Olivia Gamula.
Biggest fuel to my passion for making this a law and to help every other student get this opportunity was just how much I really took away from this class. I mean, there's so many other important lessons and life skills you can learn in other classes, but this class truly left so much with me. I remember when we did our how much we spend monthly budget, it was very humbling and very brutal awakening on how much I actually spend per month. But it just gave me so much insight on how we need to take care of our money. And without this class, I would have never really been looking at, how much do I actually eat out? Or how much do I drive around when me and my friends could just carpool? Or things like, what is a want versus what is a need? And this project was just something that really put into perspective how much everything in this world really does cost. And it just prepares you for the future. And it taught me that money is more than just paper, or for me, it's more than my debit card that I like to swipe everywhere I go. But it's just much more than that. And it makes me take a step back and actually realize what I'm doing.
With what Olivia shared, I'm thinking to myself too, I feel like I really realize the value of money in a different way when I'm earning my own big person paycheck. So, when you're teaching a class, Barbara, what does that curriculum look like for students taking your course? Clearly, Olivia took a lot from it, but how do you make it interesting and relevant to their lives?
So the assignment that she's talking about is one of my favorite to assign and watch them go, are you kidding me? And then when we get to the end, go, oh my God, I learned a lot. So they have to track every penny they spend for 30 days in an Excel spreadsheet, realizing that most of the money that they're spending is not what they're earning. At the end of those 30 days, they have to complete an essay and reflect on what did they learn about themselves? What are they going to change? And how is this going to be different when you have that first big person job? It's hysterical how many students tell me, oh my gosh, I need to stop going to Dunkin'. Or, you know what? You're right. We need to go Dutch when we go on dates because this is costing me a lot of money.
Amen, Barbara.
It's so much fun to talk to them. And I'll run into students years later and they're still talking about this project and how that was their first foray into realizing what they spent and how they spent it.
And so we just heard from a student, but we also spoke with a math teacher and a math team leader, Kathleen Lee, at the Greater Hartford Academy of the Arts full day. And we asked her about the emotions that come up when teaching this coursework.
I'm going to be completely honest with you. It's difficult. It's extremely difficult. And there's good days and there's bad days when we talk to the students because they have good and bad days. But one thing that I can say is that I have a pretty good rapport with the majority of my students, and they realize quickly that I'm open with them and I expect them to be as open as possible also. So looking at that, they can ask the questions, and I tell them, like, I remind them all the time, I'm like, I'm a mandated reporter. Be careful what you tell me. And we all laugh a little bit because it comes up at least once a week. But I let them know that it's a safe space and they can ask whatever question they want, because once they graduate, they're not going to have me as a reference to go back and ask all these questions every single day. And whatever question they do have, it's all right, because if they're asking the question, someone else probably has it too. But like you said, it's difficult for some students because some students are homeless and don't have a lot of money from their family, but they're working to be able to have a better financial understanding so that they are able to break the cycle and then grow financially to be more responsible and stable in their own future lives.
Barbara, would love to to have you respond to what we just heard from Kathy. As we've talked about earlier, that all students come from different financial backgrounds. Some face poverty, homelessness. Some are making difficult decisions about college and student loans. Personal finance can be very personal. Can you respond to what we've heard from Kathy?
Absolutely. So our school district is regional. We are Burlington and Harwinton, and financially, parts of those towns are extremely different. So we also have this is a safe zone for us to be able to talk. And I always leave it that if they aren't comfortable in class, they can speak to me or shoot me an email and I'll try to respond. Look, it doesn't matter if you make $50,000 a year or $500,000 a year. You have to live within your means. And we have to learn that at a very young age, that there is only X amount of dollars that I currently have to spend. And here are the needs that I have to cover. And then I have to start saving for emergencies and for that retirement. And then how do I also squeeze in some of those wants? And we explore a lot about wants that can substitute for something. So instead of going to, let's say, a concert, you get your friends together and you cook a meal and you hang out and play that music. There's always an alternative. And I think they need to realize that we make mistakes. I talk about growing up in Waterbury very openly. I talk about how I thrifted at the Hadassah thrift shop and Goodwill when I was in high school because I needed to. And now at 62, tomorrow I have a trip planned during my vacation to go to Red, White, and Blue in Waterbury with my cousin who is retired. And we're still thrifting, and that there is no shame in that. And that in some cases, it's really cool when you make that find. Right. They have to learn that when they earn a salary or they have an hourly wage, where is their paycheck going? How do they end up gross versus net? How do they and why do they need to save and not touch that money?
Right. And you mentioned earlier that kids should learn about this at a younger age. So should we be teaching kids financial literacy earlier than high school, you think?
Absolutely. We should be starting in pre-K and kindergarten. They can learn, what the coins are. They can learn that how they can spend something. I used to do an activity in our middle school where I would go over when newspapers used to have flyers, the Sunday flyers. And we would go over with students and do an activity where we would give them various amounts of money for the grocery store or to go out and shop. And how would you spend that money? And how do you make sure you have 10% going in your savings? There used to be a great conversation we would have about you have 3 things to do with your money. Once you earn it, you have the opportunity to save it. You have the opportunity to spend it. And when you can in your life, you have the opportunity to share it with those that need it. And I think if we can get students thinking that way at a very young age, and if we can get them to think about, I don't know about those of you that have children, but when my boys were younger, a certain percentage of any money that they got at Christmas or birthday or communion or confirmation went into their savings account. And then they had to be responsible for the rest of it. And they had to learn that when we were starting back at school, when I was buying you that new pair of sneakers, here's the amount of money I was willing to spend. Are you willing to take money out of your account to get those more expensive pair that you want, or do you want to hang on to it until later? So when we're talking about children that don't have a lot of money or don't have any money, they can still learn the value of that money so that as they change their life and as they break those barriers, they will understand that they need to pause and think before they spend.
And Nan, I want to bring you into this conversation because earlier we talked about too how everyone's financial backgrounds are different and every school district is different. So can you talk about what needs to be done to make sure that all students have access to a more robust financial literacy curriculum?
Yes, and it would be a great world if every school had a teacher like Barbara in it. But we know that people are people, and not everybody had the same background and grew up understanding all of the things about money and its importance that Barbara did or that I did. My parents talked about money all the time. Both my grandfathers owned small businesses. My dad owned a small business. So money was always being talked about and taught about. So once you pass a requirement, that's a giant first step, right? That ensures equitable access to everybody. But that's like the requirement falling in the forest, right? We need to make sure that at least a few teachers in every school district can turn into Barbara's over time. So we really need to come in and provide teacher training. And we've been very fortunate that a company and a family foundation have stepped up, and we're starting to train teachers, more teachers in Connecticut, with the goal of having at least 2 teachers in every high school trained to teach personal finance. The training is offered for free. The resources are available for free. The standards that it can help to develop their classes are available for free. All of that's for free. A lot of it is online through the Council for Economic Education. There are other people that can do this as well, but the most important thing is implementation, right? Otherwise, it just doesn't go very far. So I would really encourage teachers to go onto our website, to reach out to Barbara, to reach out to their colleagues, to get help, and we and others are there to really support them in this endeavor, and to get their kids involved in really great activities like the National Personal Finance Challenge to make it real, because that also makes it fun for everyone. And I just have to double down on what Barbara said about you're never too young. Our standards start with what kids should know how to do in 4th grade, and that's already late. So starting to talk about it, whatever grade you're teaching as a teacher or a parent with your kids, really makes a difference.
Well, thank
Catherine,
you.
can I jump in? We're talking
course.
about making sure that our educators are educated in teaching personal finance. And I think that is a really important fact. Not everybody can just jump in and start teaching this because there's so much. The other follow-up I'd like to share is that there are so many free resources out there, from the curriculum being laid out for you, to the activities, to the authentic assessments, to videos made by young students that they can use. I think that any school district that says they can't afford to do this is wrong, because the amount of free resources is such a huge plethora that sometimes I get overwhelmed at all the free things that I have available to me. So it goes back to what Nan is saying, is we really need to step up to the plate and educate the educators. I go annually to a conference called the Jumpstart National Educators Conference. And I remember meeting someone who is now very involved in this. His name is Tim Ranzetta. And the first year he was there, and he had all this resources, and he was so hyped up. And I said, Tim, how do I know your resources are going to be there in 5 years? Because that's what teachers need to know. I'm happy to say through his endowment, his organization is still there. And in the 10 plus years I've been going to this conference, there are so many more companies realizing that we need to make this available to teachers, and we need to make it available to them for free so they will use it with their students.
Well, thank you so much for that. You've been listening to Barbara Angelicola-Manzolli, who's a business education teacher at Lewis S. Mills High School in Burlington. Thank you so much, Barbara, for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
And coming up next, we focus on one program teaching financial literacy to adults. You can join the conversation, 888-720-9677, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. Many of us didn't get a financial literacy or personal finance course in high school. Starting financial education early on will set those students up for success as adults. One recent study by the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority found that only about a third of Americans have a good understanding of interest rates, mortgage rates, and overall financial risk. And joining us now is Sabrina Acosta. She's the program manager of the Connecticut Money School and Bank On. Thank you so much, Sabrina, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Sabrina, can you respond to what we've heard so far and talk about what your work looks like when you're teaching financial literacy to adults? But you're also not just teaching financial literacy to adults.
Yeah, so the Connecticut Money School is one of the asset building programs that I oversee in the state where we teach youth, adults, and even people in retirement. That has been a growing conversation about retirement, but also about the youth. And the financial literacy education bill has actually been something that's pushed our program even more on a pedestal, where I'm getting contacted by not only just the school districts in Connecticut, but in Massachusetts, New York, Rhode Island, and people asking us in Milwaukee, Atlanta, Georgia, and they're asking, what are we doing in Connecticut that is so revolutionary that they want to bring it to their own states?
And, of course, this is, you're seeing so many people, adults and younger people as well. When people come to your office, what does their financial state look like?
A lot of people are coming to me with high debt and low income. So we call them LMI communities or ALICE communities, where they are making income, they might be employed, but they're asset limited. So they're actually constrained in a certain way where we need to teach them the basics first. I know that they come to me in a lot of turmoil and stress, but trying to get through to them and talk to them first and understand that they need to just assess their budget and what they're spending so they can understand what they need to save to pay off some of that debt is super critical.
When you mentioned a lot of the turmoil and stress, which adds on to a lot of people struggling with financial trauma. And can you talk about how that factors into financial coaching?
Yes, a lot of that comes with just talking about the trauma.
Right.
So with financial trauma, a lot of people don't understand where it started, where it began. Speaking on my own beliefs and what I know for myself, mortgage was something that was like a daunting word when I was younger. So growing up and hearing people talk about the market this, the market that, a lot of people are coming to us wondering, is this even something that I can do? How do I keep my house? How do I refinance? How do I afford living right now? So we have to just talk to them about, well, what do you know? And what weren't you taught? And a lot of it goes down to, I wasn't taught anything. I was just told, this is what my parents did, so this is what I'm doing, and now I don't know what to do.
And how do they react usually after you sort of go through this coaching? Or do they feel better about it? Are they more comfortable?
They definitely walk away with a sense of confidence that somebody has actually listened to them. That's the main thing that they're coming to us about is they want solutions, they want answers, but they also want to feel like they're heard. They're not the only ones, and letting them know that you're not the only individual in Connecticut, in the state, in the world that has experienced debt. You have to just accept it and make a game plan.
And you work with a wide variety of people. You also work with formerly incarcerated persons. Can you describe what that looks like? I assume it's a very different kind of challenge as well.
Yes, currently we are in tax season, and that is the main topic of conversation around returning citizens, is the ability to file taxes while you are incarcerated. That is something that has been limited, but we have been working very vigorously to get inside and actually assist within 6 months prior to release. We want to make sure that we're going in, getting people their IDs. That's a big thing that they also need is identification to open up a bank account or basically to do anything, to get a job, all of their requirements. We want to limit their stress and just show them where the resources actually are because, as it was mentioned before, a lot of them are free.
And there are so many different kinds of barriers, I think, when we're talking about financial stability. Can you talk about that? What kind of barriers are you seeing?
A lot of barriers are just understanding what their income actually can do for them. A lot of people think more money means less problems, but if you're not managing your money right, then you're going to end up in a perpetual cycle of where is my money going? If you're not tracking it, if you're not understanding how to budget and what you need to budget for. But even using different words so you can trick yourself, it's not a budget, it's a spending plan. It's a saving analysis. Do something to make it interesting for you so you can keep that discipline, or else you're going to continue to make those bad habits. like me and my coffee.
But hey, if it brings you joy, if it brings you a little joy, and I think the conversations about finance certainly has changed a lot. And when we were talking about this conversation, I was thinking about, I think like in the 90s, especially like late 80s, there's a lot of like financial experts or gurus, if you will, with this very specific messaging like, oh, you have to have more than 3 paychecks in your savings, otherwise,
Yes.
you're a failure or things like that. And it sounds like a lot of people who have experienced financial trauma or are still experiencing that trauma, I wonder if it's a little bit from that era, from that generation. Can you talk about that?
That is one of the first things that comes up when I teach the savings or budgeting module. It's, well, I was told to have 3 times, what you spend in a month in your savings account. I don't know anybody who actually has that. Very honestly, groceries are super expensive. So I'm even going to the grocery store like, what's in my bank account and what is in my cart? Let me compare. But even that alone, thinking that, the person that you're talking to is telling you to do something, well, do they have that budget?
Right.
Do they have that same understanding? Because life can be difficult. So what are you capable of doing and where can you actually start? Because you're not going to start at the finish line.
Right. And Representative Paris, you reacted to that. What are your thoughts with related to that?
I think it's interesting, and Sabrina brings up a really good point. I've been reading Forbes magazine's recent articles on financial outlooks, and it shared with its readers that folks who make over $120,000 a year are living paycheck to paycheck. Nearly 40% of Americans in that model. Not only that, but younger people are not saving much money anymore. They're okay with renting. But they rather take their money, go on vacation now.
Yes.
They rather take their money, go to concerts now. They rather take their money and enjoy life now, whereas previous generations waited until the very end and didn't see enough. They didn't reap enough of their benefits of enough rewards from their hard work and their saving. And so I think it is a generational shift. And with that generational shift, we need to shift the conversation in terms of, you don't necessarily, much to what Sabrina said, need to have 3 months worth of a salary sitting in your bank account. But you do need to figure out how to access money in other avenues and from other areas if you do run into some trouble after you get back from your trip to Monaco. Whatever the case may be, enjoy life, but also, and I think by a lot of young people in this generation enjoying life now, it is less stress on them as being self-identified in many focus groups or panels. It's less stress on them financially. Their stress comes from other things, anxiety because of world events, because of behavioral health challenges. Money is not at the forefront for our younger generations.
I agree, but I also want to challenge that because I feel like it's outside looking in, that's what you're seeing. But I can tell you when I speak to the students that are younger, when I speak to the younger generation, it is on our mind, but we've adapted almost this personality and this like masking way to just cope with it by saying, I'm going to enjoy what I have now, even though I know I'm probably not set up for success later.
Right.
We're hopeful that something's going to happen in the state and something's going to happen in the nation where maybe my student loan debt will get magically taken care of. But at the same time, that's not to say that we're not living in the same anxiety, because for myself, speaking from personal experience, speaking from a college graduate experience, I talk to all my friends. Half of us are like, student loans who? Student loans where? But we know the anxiety that comes with it. What does our retirement plan look like? What does paying that back look like? Will I ever be able to buy a home? Well, I can't do that right now. I can't fathom the idea of it, so I'm going to go on that vacation
Well, I want
to have a good time.
And I want to ask you to expand on that changing philosophy about money, and also both of you too, in terms of like the conversations are changing, but what happens when a big life event happens, like job loss, right?
COVID
Sabrina?
was a big thing.
Yeah.
So I was part of the group that graduated during COVID. I went home for spring break and never came back. And that to me said, how am I going to get a job? Where am I going to live? I was in student housing, so I had to go back home. If there wasn't a place for you to go back home, you were already at a fault.
Right.
You were blaming yourself. You were figuring out, okay, what could I have done better? Nobody could have prepared for that. Nobody knew that that was going to happen. And we still don't know what's going to happen in the next coming years. But we can be hopeful. We can plan. We can educate ourselves. A lot of people don't want to look for the resources because it does provide a little bit of anxiety knowing what you didn't know before, wishing you did.
Right.
But that's okay. And
Right.
working through that financial trauma and that mindset of you didn't know it before, but you know it now. So what can we do now? We can't change the past. You already went to school. You have the debt. COVID happened. You might have lost your job, but there's resources out there. Let's start the rebuilding process, and changing our mindset is going to be where we really need to start.
And Representative, what do you think? I feel like we're talking about a generation that perhaps is more comfortable with riffing versus a plan.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with the idea and notion of riffing as opposed to a plan. And look, I think to Sabrina's point, I think that it's still at the forefront of people's minds. I'm not saying that it's not a concern of theirs, but because you're looking at a generation that's gone through major wars, it's gone through a worldwide pandemic, it's gone through 9/11, it's gone through all of these different things, economic downturns multiple times, school shootings, like the challenges of what they're thinking of, I think to that point, is trying to get by through survival each day. And whereas generations in the past, I mean, my grandmother and grandfather, they would tell us to turn off all the lights if you leave a room, but they were so adamant. They would unscrew the light bulbs from the sockets just to make sure we weren't spending money. I'm kind of stuck in both generations because I am worried about money all the time. But at the same time, I'm trying to figure out ways to enjoy and reap the rewards of my work. And I think for a lot of young people, we're still trying to find that fine line. And I think this next generation will redefine that for the generations to come after. But we still need to arm them with as many resources as necessary to ensure they don't fall into any pit holes.
Absolutely. And obviously we can talk about this for days, but unfortunately when we're having fun, time flies by. We only got about a minute and a half left, but 30 seconds to both of you. Final thoughts. Sabrina, go for it.
I just want everybody out there to know that there is resources available. There are programs that you can offer to the community. And if we just get together as a collective that care about this and we start voicing that a little bit more, then people will be less shy, less guilty, less anxiety ridden to actually come forward and ask their questions, because that's where they really are afraid to do. They're not asking questions. So if we just go out there and answer them and show them where it's at, we might be able to change their mindset a little bit.
Representative?
Yeah, I think, this is a perfect example as to how one small policy that you think will only affect a certain segment of a population actually has rippling effects throughout the entire state in generations and for years to come. So I'm really excited to see this policy be implemented. I'm really proud of the work that Senator McCrory and I and others have done on this work and this policy. But even more so, I'm excited to see how we close the socioeconomic gap in the future because of the work that will be done in the classroom from this policy and mandate.
Well, thank you so much. You are listening to State Representative Corey Paris. Thank you so much for being on Where We Live today. And you are also listening to Sabrina Acosta, who's with the Connecticut Money School and Bank On Program Manager. Thank you so much, Sabrina, for being here.
Thank you.
And also shout out to Nan Morrison, who's the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Council for Economic Education. Thank you so much, Nan, for being back with us today.
Most welcome. A great show from everybody.
Well, it's a teamwork here. Thank you so much, everyone. I'm Catherine Shen. Today's show is produced by Tess Terrible. Our technical producer is Kat Pastor. Download Where We Live anytime on your favorite podcast app. And thank you so much for listening.